We are going to be presenting, giving this webinar on demystifying the application process. So I think what we'll do is we'll run through the information, and then at the end we'll save lots of times for questions. It could be about the application process, about the internship in general, or anything else, and encourage you definitely to ask a lot of questions. We should have a lot of time. To start off, you can, if you can just use the chat function, and we can maybe kind of capture some of the questions in that way. And then maybe if we run through all of them, we can open up the webinar to voice questions as well, which is always great. But thank you for joining us. Sarah, you can go to the next slide. The Business Plan Internship, I'm assuming that everyone on the call has heard of it now, because you're here interested in the interview process. But just to kind of give a rundown in 30 seconds. So we are the National Park Service. We work with Inspiring Capital to recruit graduate school students in business policy, environmental management, and other related fields to serve as internal consultants for the Park Service. It's an 11-week paid business plan internship program. And so we also, within the Park Service, we're carefully scoping out projects with parks all across the system, all across the country, and we select the top 9 to be selected for the BPI projects. So then we pair up the consultants, send you off in teams of 2 after a rigorous training, and you live in a park for 10 weeks. And you kind of help them get hands-on management consulting experience, helping them solve some of their kind of trickiest, thorniest problems, doing operational or organizational analysis, and you report out to their leadership team, giving your recommendations at the end of the summer. And again, it's a kind of a real world problem, and you're providing recommendations along the way. And so they are, since it is competitive on their side as well, really interested to get your brains on these things. The program dates are June 6th to August 21st, 2020. And of course, for more information, you can go to the Inspiring Capital website where you found this webinar link. So as I mentioned, my name is Stephen. I am a BPI consultant of the class of 2015. I did my program at Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, where I worked on an operational analysis for them with my co-consultant, and got up to a lot of really cool stuff down in the cave over the summer. Rachel, you want to go and give your much better rundown? Yeah.
So I am a BPI consultant class of 2018, and I was in Kalaupapa National Historic Park in Hawaii doing a budget and workforce analysis. So the project was really interesting. Location was great. Got to hike 3 Mile High Cliffs to get my groceries, but was next to the beach, so I was happy.
Excellent. Thanks, Rachel. Great. So that's the Business Plan Internship in a nutshell. Again, hopefully that's a review for you all, but if you do have any more questions, please feel free to reach out. Great. Next slide, Sarah. So a little bit about what we will talk about today. Just a quick summary of the process and timelines we're looking at for applying to this incredible experience. And then we'll recap kind of who makes a good BPI consultant. Probably kind of the kind of thing you should be thinking about as you're applying and want to make yourself look like that great BPI consultant. And then finally, kind of tips for the case portion of an interview. So the final piece of it includes a case interview, and so we'll kind of go into some detail of what that looks like, and some tips and best practices. So next slide, Sarah. So first off, just some really quick kind of the interview process and timeline. So we do have a 3-stage interview process. The initial application is due December 15th, so that's the first date you're going to want to know. And that's where you can apply from the Inspiring Capital website. You upload a resume, you type in some of your biographical information, some of the details about yourself, like what school and what program are you from. You list some professional references, and then there's 3 short answer questions. So a couple points on that. Professional references should be professional. So we've gotten a few questions about that. We will contact them, and they should really speak to your professional background and work ethic. The rest of the stuff that you might want to use a reference for, like to share that you're really into the national parks or whatever the case might be, that should come out in your short answer questions or in the rest of your interview. So please just kind of note that about the references. The short answer questions, at this point, the application is open, so it's not a secret. It's kind of the types of things that you would put in a typical cover letter if you were applying for something. So why are you interested in working with the National Park Service? How does it fit into your career plans? What traits and skills would you bring into the internship? And then, finally, kind of how you've used quantitative or qualitative analysis in the past, and how do you make decisions with those things. So that's the first stage. And then after submitting that application in mid-December, you will get a link to submit a video interview. And so it's a series of short answer questions where we will give you a prompt. You'll have a few minutes to think about it, jot down your notes, and then respond kind of in real time to that question. So again, you might have a couple chances to redo, but we're not looking for kind of polished speeches on the topic. We're really kind of trying to get a sense of who you are and speaking to your background. And then the final round is a video interview. So you'll actually be speaking over webinar to one of us, and we'll spend about 10 minutes kind of just getting some background information about you, learning more about you, and then we'll dive into a case interview. And so we'll spend most of the time in that final round interview kind of doing that case, and then kind of wrapping up with questions and answers and next steps. So that's what the whole interview process looks like. The video interviews will happen kind of mid-January to mid-February. We'll make offers to join the cohort on a rolling basis, and we hope to have that finalized by early March. And the final piece to note with that is that while we should have a kind of a tentatively final list or near final list of projects for the summer, so that you know kind of the types of places you may be going. We won't kind of match you up or give you an offer related to a specific site. So we ask that you accept those offers kind of prior to learning where you're going to go, and then we'll work with you to kind of understand your preferences, where your top choice is, and what skills and interests you're bringing. Great, next slide. I think we recapped thoroughly enough, and again, more information is on Inspiring Capital's website. So next up, just kind of what makes a good BPI consultant?
Awesome. So our ideal BPI consultant is someone who is passionate and committed to the National Park Service mission, someone who is entrepreneurial, adventurous, flexible, like think someone you want to work with, you want to be that person. And then you also have like excellent analytical communication skills, project management skills. The internship, while it's likely in a really cool, beautiful location, you will spend 95% of your time in an office, like working in Excel at the intersection of pivot tables and National Park Service mission. So that part matters too. What you will not get bonus points for are things like attending every single webinar and asking us lots of questions.
So we do appreciate
that. Sorry, yeah, we do appreciate that. If you have questions but you don't get extra bonus points for it. Being able to name like the largest or smallest national park sites or any type of cool National Park Service trivia, while our team really enjoys that, we can't just dole out bonus points for that. And then you also won't get credit for visiting every single one of the 419 areas administered by the National Park Service. So just as a reminder, you don't need to suddenly become like a National Park Service trivia buff who's visited every location. We just want to know, are you good to work with, are you passionate about the mission, and can you bring a tool set to help solve these problems? Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, thanks. All right, so let's get to the meat of it. Tips for the case portion of an interview. Excuse me. So, first thing, what is a case interview? I will be the first to admit, I went to public policy school and had never done a case interview before interviewing for the Business Plan Internship program. I have since done no case interviews. So, some would say that's maybe a success story, but it is what it is. For those of you in business school, you may be much more familiar with case interviews than for folks in policy school, environmental management school, or other fields. So basically what it is, they're common in business, especially consulting roles, where you're presented a scenario, and then you are kind of, as the interviewer, or interviewee, I should say, you kind of lead the process to investigate kind of how you're going to find a solution to that challenging scenario. So, I bolded here what I think are the key points from this Wikipedia article, but, we are not looking for a correct answer. Often there is no kind of one correct answer. We're really trying to get a sense of how you think about a problem, how you talk about it, and how you arrive at a solution. So that's kind of the basic background for what a case interview is. They sound pretty scary, but it's essentially you're given a scenario and you're asked to kind of talk it through. All right, so the next slide. What does the case interview look like for the BPI interview? So as I mentioned, the final round of interview, we'll ask some behavioral questions, we'll get everyone warmed up, and then it will be about a 40-minute case portion. What we do is we provide background information, and it's all kind of provided verbally over the webinar. So you will see someone like me or Rachel. We'll probably be reading from a script. You'll see us look down and kind of give an introduction to the park. Since we are the National Parks Business Plan Internship, you'll be doing a scenario involved with a park. And so we'll give some background, some basic information, those sorts of things that you would want to know about the park. And then we'll give a description of the problem, and then kind of what exactly you're expected to quote-unquote solve over the next 40 minutes. And basically that's it. Not a lot of detail is given up front, but we ask you to kind of think through the problem, how you would approach it, and then ultimately pitch your recommended course of action. So for this, you can use any aids you'd like to. You can use a calculator, a computer, notepad, pencil, all to kind of help you do some quick calculations on the fly. But as we'll get to in the tips, it's meant to be an aid. Don't get too lost in those sorts of things. That's basically how it's structured. And as I said, you will lead kind of the process. And so it's kind of on you to kind of ask follow-up questions to figure out what you would need to make your recommendation, and then kind of figure out what information is available. Often in the Park Service, we're dealing with incomplete data sets or imperfect information, and so you have to figure out kind of as much information as you can, and then make the most kind of qualified decision you can with that information. So that's what we look for. So without further ado, I thought we'd have Rachel here give an example, actually the example that she interviewed with. Mm-hmm. So this is a real-life BPI case that we ran as recently as 2017, 2018. We will no longer be using this case, but it just thought that we could show you kind of an example of this is the kind of thing that the exact script that somebody on the business management group team would be reading to you. So Rachel will present it, and then we'll kind of talk through how you might approach it.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. All right. Emerald Island National Park is a small park in the Pacific Northwest that offers visitors the opportunity to hike on trails that wind through ancient coniferous forests, observing migrating whales from a stunning coastline and appreciate Indigenous cultures that have called the island home for millennia. You are one of the 2 BPI consultants spending your summer at EMIS to help the park develop other commercial service strategies. Specifically, the park superintendent has asked you to help her compare 2 options for expanding use at one of the park's existing campgrounds. The first option consists of adding 50 sites to the existing campground. Each campsite would be capable of accommodating up to 4 campers. Campsites would be reserved through an online system which would charge a fee per reservation, not per camper. Each camper would also be charged a fee for every day he or she occupies a campsite. The second option consists of adding 25 recreational vehicle sites to the existing campground. Each RV site would be capable of accommodating a single RV. RV sites would be reserved through an online system which would charge a fee per reservation, not per RV camper. RV operators would also be charged a fee for every day he or she occupies a park RV site, regardless of how many people are residing in the RV. How would you approach this problem?
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Stephen.
Excellent job. I will admit I gave her about 3 minutes before the webinar, telling her that I was going to task her with reading it. So, great. So that's how the case is set up. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of information in there, but a whole lot of information that's not included in that kind of prompt in the setup. And so you, as the person being interviewed, should be kind of asking yourself, what information do I need to solve this, or to make a recommendation? So when approaching something like this, I think the first thing to note is that you should make sure you know very clearly what the question is. And so in this one, it comes at the end of that first paragraph. The park superintendent has asked you to help compare 2 options for expanding use at the park's existing campgrounds. So that right there kind of lays out what you're expected to do. And then you can see that the second and third paragraph each lay out one of the options, right? So that's the first step. I think then the next thing you'll want to do is think through kind of, well, if you're comparing 2 options, what are the criteria that you might use to kind of make a decision there? So I'll put Rachel on the spot. Rachel, what is one thing you might consider when looking at a problem like this?
So in a problem like this, I would be curious about the different cost structure behind setting up campsites for, like, what I'm assuming are tents and like car camping versus RVs. Because the cost would be different, and I'd also be curious if we're charging different fees. So in the end, I'd want to know if one of them is, not that it's always about profit, but is one of them more revenue earning and more likely to like cover the costs of the new campground. Gotcha.
So, great example.
Thank you.
So what Rachel outlined right there is, each of the different options has different costs associated, as well as different revenues. And so that's a great example. I got the sense just from hearing her talk through how she would approach the project, that she's already kind of thinking, okay, I'm going to deal with costs, kind of lay those out by option, and then I'm going to deal with the revenues and lay those out by option, which is exactly the kind of thing that as interviewers we're looking for. We're trying to get a sense of how are you approaching this? Are you kind of using a very structured, systematic approach, or are you just kind of throwing things against the wall and see what sticks, which is not preferable. We definitely are looking for that kind of structured thinking. One other note that I would say on this slide here, we've given you this example so that you can kind of read along and process, but generally these will be given kind of over webinar. We'll be reading it to you, so you should be prepared to kind of take notes. At any point, feel free to stop us and like ask for clarification or ask for, hey, can I get that number again? How many sites are you looking for? But you won't have kind of this slide to fall back on and go back continuously to check. So you want to make sure you're kind of keeping accurate notes and that you're structuring your thoughts right from the start. Other things that you might want to consider are like the environmental impacts of the construction. So you have costs, you have revenue, but you're working for the National Park Service, and so a big part of what we do is preserve and protect these beautiful places. And so, if one of the options involves cutting down some of that ancient coniferous forest, you want to find that out and be asking those kind of questions so that ultimately you can brief the superintendent on your recommendations. Mm-hmm. So that's a quick run through. I thought that we would spend the rest of the time just talking a little bit about tips and best practices from our experience, and then we can open it up to questions and maybe dig in a little bit more. So my first recommendation is to practice. Practice with a classmate. Most likely your career services office will have somebody who is familiar or used to kind of giving case interviews or practicing with people. So find someone who is in consulting or has done one before. It's really a unique and challenging new way of interviewing that for me, I actually found a classmate by saying kind of a few days before, like, I have this final interview coming up, it's a case. He was like, he stopped me, he was like, have you ever done a case before? And I said, no. And he said, meet me at noon. We're going to spend lunch and practice. And I'm so glad he did, because it helps so much to kind of get a few under your belt and just kind of flex those muscles of how you take notes, how you think about something on the fly, and then how you communicate it to us, how you're thinking about things. So.
And also, so definitely, as Stephen already mentioned, take notes, especially while we're giving you information. And I'd recommend taking notes on hard copy. That way you're not going between like your laptop and interview video and your notes. That way you can just have everything right in front of you organized. I know when I interviewed with the NPS, I think I had like a stack of like 15 like printer papers just in front of me and like 5 pens, so that like I was over prepared with that. So take notes, be prepared for that. Yeah,
that's a great point. Probably one of the best interviews that I did last year. As I mentioned, it's all over webcam, and so the person interviewing had been taking notes throughout the time that I was laying out the prompt, and then asked for a minute. He kind of made a quick sketch, and then held it up to the camera and said, like, this is how I'm thinking about the problem. And I just thought that was great. It was a really quick way to show me, it doesn't have to be fancy, but kind of convey that they understood the question and they could communicate kind of how they were thinking about it. Which gets us to tip number 3, read the problem back to the interviewer. I think that's really important. We, in this case, Rachel, read, 3 paragraphs. You got to get caught up in this prompt. And before you kind of just get off and running, take some time, recap your notes, and try to succinctly summarize what the problem is, what the 2 options are, back to us. And not only does it show us that you're kind of processing that information, but it's your chance to make sure that you have all of the information correct. You definitely don't want to kind of start doing calculations right away and then realize that you misheard a number or something. And so it's a great time to ask for clarifying questions.
And don't rush. Like, you have those cases set up to have plenty of time for like the 40 minutes that we have with you to do the case. So no need to rush. Take your time. Keep a clear head.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, you will spend the entire 40 minutes. So don't worry about that. But again, from our perspective, I think we would rather see someone who is showing a very kind of clear, systematic approach, and potentially, doesn't quite get as far going down through all the different rabbit holes than someone who is just taking a scattershot approach and just really kind of rushing in every direction. We're looking for that kind of systematic, structured thinking. And so rushing is the best way to get out of that and to just get yourself confused. So next tip, talk it through out loud. So obviously one of the challenging parts for me doing a case was I like to kind of go away in a corner, scribble down all my notes, kind of do all my calculations, and then come back and present it. Like, that's what's comfortable to me. It's really hard for me to talk through what I'm doing as I'm doing it, and that's a tough skill. But it helps to kind of bring the interviewer along with your thought process, which, again, ultimately that's what we're trying to gauge here. It also helps to kind of, sometimes catch any kind of quick errors that you might have made or misunderstandings. And it's a lot easier to do that than, as you're talking it through, just, say like, 5 people times 4 campsites, so 25, and they'll say like, whoa, I think you mean 20 there, and that's fine. We know that you know what 5 times 4 is. You're just talking it through out loud, and you're trying to do a lot of things at once, and so that's way easier than to kind of present a final model, and then we have to figure out like, yeah, your numbers didn't quite come out right. Let's figure that out. So talk it through out loud, both to kind of catch any errors, but also just to kind of like bring us along with what you're thinking about.
I think this next one's one of my personal favorites on this list, which is don't rely on Excel or your calculator. So we build the case out so that it is more than possible to do it on paper, with paper and pen, and also probably some numbers, possibly even some numbers in your head for those of you who are like mental math champions. I know for me, the National Park Service case interview is also the first case interview I did as well, and it was one where I knew that we could use Excel or a calculator, but I was just like, I'm not going to introduce any other variables into this system than my brain and this pen and this piece of paper. And so you can, if you're so nervous that you think you'll lose it, like, want to bring in a calculator, go for it, but we'd really highly recommend, like, don't rely on it entirely. Is there anything you want to add to that, Stephen?
Yeah, and it's fun to use a calculator for sure. We see that all the time. Again, it's kind of talking through the calculations you're making. Like, you want to kind of write down everything that you would do and then do the calculation, as opposed to kind of just sitting there typing numbers into your calculator. Because if you get lost, then you'll get flustered. We have no idea where you are, or like if we can help you. You'll just have to like start all over again, and that is a terrible feeling. So best tip or best practice, like, definitely just write down like all of the calculations you want to do. Tell us what you're going to do, and then just say like, I'm going to take a minute to just figure out these final numbers or whatever, and that's fine. Again, we're really looking not so much that you know how to use a calculator, but that you can kind of come up with the right questions to ask. The next point, I think we kind of got to it on the previous slide, but break the problem down into pieces and solve one piece at a time. So like Rachel said, when I put her on the spot, she said the first thing I think about are the different cost structures. So, take one piece of your paper and just make a column and say like cost, and figure that piece out, right? And then move on to revenue, and then figure out, what 25 RV sites is going to produce in revenue versus 50 walk-in campsites or whatever. By doing it one piece at a time, it'll just kind of help you stay clear. It'll kind of avoid getting too tangled up in different variables and those sorts of things, and it also makes it easier to kind of if you don't finish that like final piece, you'll still have some pieces that you can talk about and base a final recommendation on.
And so also, as you're talking through your case, you want to remember your audience. So you are case interviewing with us. So like Stephen's mentioned this like a few times now, like we want to know your methodology. We want to know how you get there. We want to know that if we hire you, you can like lead a project and think clearly on your own with only 1 or 2 check-ins per week. So that's what we're looking for in the case interview. And the other side of it, again, is that like the case interview isn't with like one of the top 5 consulting firms where we're just thinking about profit or revenue. It's also you're with the National Park Service, so you're thinking through how do you like remember your audience is that as well. And there's certain questions there that you would be good to have you ask, where maybe in another setting you wouldn't have to, related to environmental impact and sort of how the mission of the National Park Service fits into sort of what your work is.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's really easy to kind of solve to a number. And in our work, there's often not one number that gives you the right answer. So one solution might create more revenue and fewer costs, but there's more variables involved. So be thinking through those, kind of reflect back on the MPS mission. And then the final point, at the end, make a recommendation. That's really important. So, we know that you're not experts. We know that you have never been superintendent of a national park. We know that you're maybe not, used to weighing different types of campsites and choosing which is the best model. That's fine, but we've given you some information, and we want to see you kind of take a stand. Like I said, often with these things, there's no right answer. So kind of come up with the one you feel most comfortable with, and then support it with your rationale. So don't just kind of say like, well, this is clearly the right answer. Say, I would do this, and for reasons X, Y, and Z, maybe reasons A, B, and C are reasons that I actually feel like not as comfortable with it, but X, Y, and Z are stronger, and so I'm going to go with this recommendation. I think acknowledging the weaknesses of that option is a great thing to do, but most importantly, we as interviewers get frustrated when people kind of refuse to take a stand at the end, or just say like, well, there's a lot, it's really complicated. Like that's not why we're doing this exercise. We've gone on a 40-minute journey with you. At the end, kind of tie it together with a recommendation. Great. So Sarah, I think that is all we have prepared. We've taken about a half an hour, and would love to open it up to any questions. So I don't see any in the chat yet. Maybe we can risk kind of total anarchy and just open up the phone lines if people have anything to ask. If you don't feel comfortable asking over the phone, feel free to type a question into chat. Again, this can be about case interviews. This could be about the application process. It could be about favorite food to eat while you're at Kalapapa. It could be about anything related to BPI or the National Park Service. So it's your last chance to get to us before the interview and the application closes. So we do have one. John says, so this isn't case related. Professional experiences are abroad. Do you mind calling people internationally, or what would you recommend we do? Great question. This actually, so my references were also abroad, and I recall the business management group at the time called them. So it's something we can do. I would say just make sure you might want to tip them off that you are interviewing and using them as a reference, and maybe even kind of give good times to reach those folks. Obviously, we try to be respectful of time zones and whatnot, but I would say kind of keep that in mind. Anything else on that note? Yeah, we'll reach out to folks. We generally, the professional references kind of come into play at that final interview stage. So you will know if you make it to the final interview round, you'll set up an interview and you'll schedule that with us. And so you should know when that interview will be happening, and you'll have like kind of a chance to reach out and tip them off that, hey, you might be receiving a call from the United States. Let's see. I was realizing we didn't unmute everyone. Sarah, I don't know. I'm just going to acknowledge that I'm not sure the best way to do that. So it looks like some people are unmuted anyway. Feel free to chime in with questions.
I'll ask a question.
Thank you. Yeah, all right.
I used to host a lot of webinars, so I know what it's like to be hanging out there. Thinking back to your experience, is there anything you would have changed about the process that is in your control?
Thinking back to my experience as a consultant or as someone who went through the interview process?
As a consultant.
As a consultant. Yeah, so kind of like what did I learn? What would I do differently? Yeah, good question. I think when I reflect back on my summer as a BPI consultant, one of the things that I really took away from it was really being clear with kind of what questions you ask someone and how they might answer. And so what I mean is you spend a lot of your time going out around the park, interviewing folks from all different divisions, understanding what their job is. And my co-consultant and I spent a lot of time kind of coming up with interview questions and going out and meeting with folks. And it took a few weeks for us to realize, like, man, we spent so much time thinking through, like, what we want to ask and who we're going to ask what. But we didn't always get the answers we wanted to. And so what we learned was, really kind of putting yourself in the mindset of the person you are asking, understanding what it is and how that answer ties into the work you're doing, and being very specific and clear about what type of, kind of how to ask the question to get the answer you need. So it's not just kind of walking in and saying, like, well, what do you do? But really kind of thinking deeply about kind of how they think about their work and their job, and asking a question that's going to lead you to the answer that you need for your analysis. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think if I were to summarize, now that I work full-time for the Park Service, I spend a lot more time thinking through, like, how am I going to get that answer that I need, as opposed to just like, well, I'll just ask some questions. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super helpful, and it actually makes a lot of sense.
Great. All right, so we got another question. Recap the application process and what we need to submit. Sure, so I will do this. First of all, I will say definitely check out the Inspiring Capital website. The interview kind of steps and stages are outlined at the bottom there. The first thing is the initial application is the written one. It's the link on the Inspiring Capital website. That's due December 15th. And you submit a resume, some quick biographical information, you list some references, and then there's 3 short answer questions. After that, you will get a link to do some video interviews, where you'll do some short answer video interviews. That's due January 1st, so you have a few weeks to work on that. It's kind of an all-in-one-shot thing, where you get a couple minutes to kind of jot down notes, and then you will get a live kind of recording where you get to talk into the camera and give your answers to those questions. And then finally, there's a final round video interview. That happens kind of from mid-January to mid-February, and that's with some behavioral questions, as well as a case that will be kind of presented to you from the business management group. I think that's it. The first step, though, is go to that Inspiring Capital website to start the application and get that in, and that kind of triggers everything else. And so that due date is, again, December 15th. Yeah.
This one, Stephen, do you want to manage this one too? I'm not sure I know it.
Sure. So for applicants that also applied last year, how differentiated would we hope the answers to your short answer questions would be from previous ones, given that the questions themselves are about the same. Yeah, so good question. I think what they're getting at there is in that three-stage interview process, the short answer questions that are on, that you can kind of type out an answer to are pretty general. I read them out, kind of, why are you interested in working with the National Park Service? What traits or skills do you bring to this? And then kind of how in the past have you approached something like this, you doing some analysis to inform an important decision. So those are the questions. They're not a secret. I would say if you feel really strongly about that you put your best foot forward and came up with your best responses, no one is going to know the difference if you submit the same responses. We get a lot of applications. I would say, perhaps in the last year you've got better examples or whatnot. And so, definitely think about it, but we're not going to look too hard at who submitted last year and what their exact responses were. Okay, so we got a question. Julia asked, if the internship is posted in the school's career site, which posting should we apply to, the schools, Inspiring Capitals, or both? So I might defer to our partner, Sarah, because she knows kind of how all these sites work. Yeah, Sarah, maybe I'll just turn it to you. Can you take a stab at this one?
Yeah, great. Thanks. And so I guess I can take a stab at this one. Julia, I would say that all of the postings on the school, we do put them and point you guys to the external link. So they will all go to that same survey area to apply. And so do not apply internally. So apply to that external link. And just a little bit for everyone else, I will unmute everyone. So if you are having trouble unmuting yourself, this is a good time to speak up. So I'm about to do that as well. But if you'd rather have yourself muted, please just remute yourself. So everyone is unmuted now. But yes, again, apply on that external link. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Sarah.
You can't send it, that's fine. It's just after you drop the phone.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Shit, sorry.
anyways, I gotta get in here.
All right, later.
Oh, is that a question for the National Park Service? Sorry, I said I unmuted everyone.
Yeah. So it looks like we have about 15 minutes left in the hour. We don't need to take the whole hour if everyone's feeling good. Though you haven't dropped off the call yet, and we already said that no bonus points are given for staying for the entire webinar. So I think that there might be some more questions out there. We'll look for a couple more.
Hey there, I have a question that's not necessarily related to the interview process.
Sure.
So I'm just curious, what has been the biggest surprise having done the internship and now being on full time? What was the biggest surprise in transitioning over?
Yeah, wow, that's a big question. So I might warm call my colleague Rachel. I think of a better answer. But Rachel, so Rachel is newer to the team. Did the internship in 2018 and then just recently joined within the last month. And so, yeah, what's been your biggest surprise, Rachel?
Yeah, so I'm not sure, I don't know if I'd entirely call this a surprise, but I'd call it something that's become, I now understand more, is that as a BPI consultant, my manager at the time, like all the data from like the National Park Service, like high level, like the park scorecard, that type of data, or all their budget data, my manager got for me. And when I came in as a BPI consultant, we were given these flash drives with like a lot of the information we needed to start the project. And we went to Kalapapa and we did a lot of interviews, and that's where we dug in deeper. Now that I'm a part of the BMG and realizing I have to go and get this information for my consultants myself, I'm realizing like part of it's just like learning systems, but that said, like the National Park Service is a really big system, and sometimes things are intuitive, sometimes things are not intuitive. And so I think for me, like it hasn't really been a surprise, it's just been more of a like, oh, that's how we get this information. Or like, oh, Rachel made that look really easy. Actually, unfortunately, like this one database doesn't spit out information in a way that is easy to analyze in Excel. So therefore I have to spend 6 hours reformatting this. And it's not like I wouldn't call it like negative or positive, but I think for me that's been like one of the biggest differences coming, like, as I think about my BPI consultant self, I feel like my manager made it look so easy. And it's not terribly hard, but it's not always like surfing, for me yet anyway, because I'm new.
Yeah, I was going to kind of approach it the same way in that kind of scoping project. We spend a lot of time really working with the park to scope a project to the appropriate size, to make sure we're kind of looking under every rock in terms of understanding what they're looking for, understanding any pitfalls that might come throughout the summer, and just really understanding the central question for what the consultants will be working on over the summer. As a consultant, you kind of show up and we do the best to kind of make sure that you are able to hit the ground running and kind of immediately make an impact. So we put you in a position to succeed by doing a lot of that background work. And so since joining the business management group, I've definitely, or joining the MPS in general, definitely had to focus more on that scoping and, have weekly conversations with parks or programs in the Park Service who may have a very well articulated problem that they want to try to solve, or may just say like, I think there's something here, and we kind of talk it through, and I say, yeah, keep thinking on that. And so it's all of that scoping process kind of happens in the background. We got another question.
Thank you.
Why we chose to work with the BMG after the BPI experience, and what we're working on now. So I personally, I actually started in the Park Service in one of our regional offices before joining the business management group. And so I got to kind of experience that as well. I ended up joining the business management group here a couple of years down the line. One, because I had a great BPI experience, and I love the internship, the program, and I kind of wanted to stay involved with that. Super fun time of year. But two, kind of I like the team and the way we kind of approach solving problems and helping leadership and make database decisions within the Park Service. So that's a little bit about kind of why I ended up here. Rachel and I right now, we're working on a business plan for a park, a national battlefield park, and helping them think through their priorities and kind of how to structure their workforce and organization to kind of meet those priorities and kind of those strategic goals for them. So we're doing that. We're helping out with some big trainings nationwide, kind of helping the Park Service think through financial management and best practices. And then, of course, we're getting ready for BPI 2020. So it's a little bit about what we're working on now. All right, did I hear any other voices? I feel like I might have talked over someone who was starting to ask a question, so I wanted to just, make sure I didn't talk over anyone. But we are, coming up on the hour, so we can take a couple more questions. If we don't get any, we can call it a day and look forward to your applications, but give it a couple more minutes. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Sarah, thank you for hosting us and driving the presentation and all the tech stuff so that Rachel and I could just talk at you. Yeah, so really looking forward to receiving all your applications. Again, make sure you circle that December 15th date on your calendar. Doesn't hurt to get that application in early, and then that'll kind of trigger all the other stuff. But again, if any other questions come up, feel free. Sarah just put her email there in the chat. You can email her. You can reach out, and we will get you the information you need as you are submitting your application.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, all.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Bye.
Bye.